Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take the information you're curious about and really get into it, pulling out what you need to know.
And we're here to sift through it all with you, connect the dots, and help you see that bigger picture.
Today, we're diving into something that, well, affects a lot of us, especially as we get a bit older. The sources we looked at kick off with a pretty startling number.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Over 70% of Americans aged 55 and up report dealing with digestive discomfort.
70%. Wow. That's a lot of people experiencing it like bloating, gas, constipation, regularly.
Exactly. And it's not just like a small thing. It genuinely affects how you feel day to day, your comfort, your energy.
Right. And often, the usual advice feels a bit generic. It doesn't always get to the heart of your specific problem.
Which leads people to ask, okay, but what about me? What's going on inside my body? And that sets us up perfectly for today's deep dive. Personalized nutrition for gut health. And the big question, is DNA and microbiome testing actually worth the cost and effort for Americans, especially those of us 55 and over?
That's a really timely question because, our bodies do change quite a bit in those years. Metabolism might slow down. We tend to lose some muscle mass. That's natural. And really relevant here, our ability to absorb certain nutrients can decrease.
Yeah.
Things like B12, vitamin D, calcium.
Right, I've heard about that. And then you add in the fact that many folks in this age group are managing chronic conditions, maybe diabetes or heart issues.
Osteoporosis, yeah.
All things that have dietary implications.
Plus, taking multiple medications is pretty common, isn't it? And those can definitely mess with your digestion and your gut microbiome.
Absolutely. So you can see why the idea of getting personalized insights is so incredibly appealing. Imagine, finding out exactly how your genes influence how you process fats or carbs.
Or how you react to caffeine. Exactly. Or how well you utilize specific vitamins. And then there's the gut microbiome side, getting a snapshot of your unique mix of bacteria. Seeing the good guys, maybe identifying imbalances.
The promise is huge, isn't it? Like you get this super specific data and you can tailor your diet and lifestyle just right.
Yeah, the idea is optimizing everything. Energy levels, weight management, reducing inflammation, soothing digestion, boosting your immune system, all key for staying vital and independent.
Okay, so our mission today is to really unpack that promise. How much is solid science right now? How much is still, let's say, aspirational?
Right. We need to look at how the tests work, what the actual evidence says, tackle some common myths.
Think about the practical side for someone over 55. Look at maybe some examples.
And bring in what the experts are saying. The goal is to equip you, the listener, with the info you need to make a really informed choice about whether these tests make sense for you.
Sounds good. So maybe quickly, how did we even get here? Thinking about diet so personally, nutrition science wasn't always like this.
Not at all. It evolved, right? From ancient observations like Hippocrates linking food and health to the scientific revolution, understanding metabolism.
The discovery of vitamins, getting rid of things like scurvy?
Exactly.
Right.
Which led to the first RDAs, the recommended dietary allowances. Hugely important for preventing deficiencies, but very much a one-size-fits-all model.
Designed for the average person, leaving questions about why we all react differently.
Precisely. The real game changer was the Human Genome Project finishing up around 2003. That cracked open the door to nutrigenetics, how genes affect nutrient response, and nutrigenomics, how nutrients affect gene expression.
Suddenly, diet based on your DNA seemed possible.
And right alongside that, DNA sequencing tech got way better and cheaper, letting us explore that whole hidden world in our gut, the microbiome.
Trillions of microbes.
Yeah, and projects like the NIH Human Microbiome Project started showing just how vital they are, not just for digestion, but immunity, brain health, chronic disease risk. And importantly, it changes as we age. Loss of diversity seems linked to frailty.
So you combine that scientific leap with maybe a growing interest in preventative health, digital tools, AI.
Right. It all feeds into this push for personalized nutrition and gut health, moving from just treating sickness to proactively building health, which is, well, especially relevant as we get older.
Okay, let's get into the first type of testing then. DNA-based dietary tests. Nutrigenomics. What's the core idea?
The basic concept is simple. Your unique genetic code influences how your body handles food, how you metabolize fats, carbs, absorb vitamins, maybe even your appetite signals. The promise is tailoring your diet perfectly to your biology.
And getting the sample is easy?
Usually, yeah. Just a quick saliva sample or a cheek swab you do at home, send it off to a lab.
And they look for what exactly? These SNPs?
Right. SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. Think of them as tiny one-letter variations in your DNA sequence. They're very common, but some can slightly change how a gene involved in nutrition works.
Okay, so they check specific genes. The sources mention a few common ones, like FTO.
Yeah, FTO comes up a lot. It's one of the genes most strongly and consistently associated with body weight and a person's risk of developing obesity.
So what does the test supposedly tell you?
Well, the claim is that certain variants in FTO might be linked to things like feeling less full after eating, maybe having a stronger appetite, or a tendency to store fat more easily. So a report might say if you have this specific a genotype, maybe you need to be more mindful of calories, or perhaps protein and exercise are extra important for you.
Interesting. What about MTHFR? That one sounds familiar too.
It does. MTHFR is probably one of the better studied gene-nutrient interactions available in these tests. It's crucial for processing folate, vitamin B9.
Which is important for.
Oh, lots of things. Making DNA, neurotransmitters. Folate's vital. Certain common MTHFR variants can make the enzyme less effective, so it's harder to convert folate into its active form.
So the advice might be,
If you have those variants, maybe focus on folate-rich foods, or potentially take a supplement with the already active form, L-methylfolate.
okay. And APOA2? What's that one about?
APOA2 is involved in fat metabolism, particularly related to HDL cholesterol, the good kind. Some variants might influence how your body responds to dietary fat, especially saturated fat.
Meaning?
Well, the idea put forward by some tests is that if you have a certain variant, like the CC genotype mentioned, maybe you're more likely to gain weight if you eat a diet high in saturated fat. It suggests an interaction. The gene's effect depends partly on your diet.
Got it. And PEMT?
PEMT is key for making choline, which is super important for brain health, liver function. A specific SNP there can act like a bit of a roadblock, making it harder for your body to produce enough choline on its own. This can be particularly relevant for premenopausal women.
So more choline-rich foods, maybe, like eggs.
Exactly. Eggs, liver, cruciferous veggies, or potentially a supplement might be recommended if you have that variant.
And the last one that sounded really practical, CYP1A2, the caffeine gene.
That's the one. It controls how quickly your liver breaks down caffeine. Variants determine if you're a fast metabolizer or a slow metabolizer.
And that matters because
If you're slow, caffeine sticks around longer. You might be more prone to anxiety, jitters, sleep problems from it, and maybe there's even some increased risk with really high intake. Fast metabolizers clear it quickly, so the test aims to guide how much coffee, tea, etc. is right for you.
okay, so you get this report, it highlights your variants, gives you these personalized tips. It sounds incredibly useful.
It really does sound like a roadmap, doesn't it? Tailoring things just for you. But, and this is a big but, emphasizing the sources, the actual clinical usefulness, the widespread applicability of many of these recommendations, it's still considered emerging science.
Emerging, so not quite ready for everyone yet.
Pretty much. The science is still evolving. For most common health issues people face as they age, weight gain, heart disease, diabetes, these are really complex conditions. They're influenced by lots of genes interacting, plus your whole lifestyle, your environment, sleep, stress, everything.
So one gene variant doesn't tell the whole story.
Rarely. The impact of just one or a few genes on how you respond to diet is often pretty modest compared to the impact of your overall dietary pattern and lifestyle habits. And crucially, many of the specific recommendations from these commercial tests haven't actually been proven in large, high-quality clinical trials to lead to significantly better health outcomes than just following standard, evidence-based, healthy eating advice.
So it's interesting information, maybe, but not necessarily a guaranteed path to better health than the basics.
That seems to be the consensus for now. The science is fascinating, definitely. But translating those genetic tidbits into precise, clinically validated dietary prescriptions for common health goals, that's still a really big hurdle.
All right, let's switch tracks then to the other big player, gut microbiome testing. Getting a look at that inner city of microbes.
Yeah, the microbiome. It's this incredible ecosystem, mainly in your large intestine. Trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi. They're not just sitting there.
Doing what?
Oh, all sorts of things. They break down fiber we can't digest ourselves. They produce certain vitamins like K and some B vitamins. They make these really important compounds called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
SCF?
Yeah, they're like fuel for your gut lining cells. They help reduce inflammation. The microbiome also helps train your immune system. It communicates with your brain. The gut-brain axis influences mood, energy balance, your susceptibility to certain diseases. It's hugely important.
Sounds incredibly complex. How do they even test it?
It starts with, well, a stool sample you collect at home. Send it off to the lab.
Okay.
And the lab analyzes the microbial DNA in that sample. There are a couple of main ways they do this.
Like
The most common is 16S RNA sequencing. It's generally cheaper and gives you a picture of the types of bacteria present and their relative amounts.
Then the other way.
It's whole genome shotgun sequencing. It's more comprehensive, usually more expensive, but it can identify microbes down to the species level and, importantly, tell you about their functional potential, what genes they have, what they could be doing metabolically.
Right. So what does a typical report tell you?
Usually, it gives you a score for microbial diversity. Generally, having a wide variety of different microbes is linked to a healthier, more resilient gut. Low diversity, sometimes called dysbiosis, is often associated with health challenges.
Okay, diversity score. What else?
It'll break down the composition, which types of bacteria are most abundant. They might highlight beneficial groups like bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, the kinds you find in probiotics and fermented foods, or key butyrate producers like Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. Butyrate is one of those beneficial SCFAs.
And if you get the fancier shotgun sequencing?
Then you might get insights into functional pathways, like the potential capacity of your microbiome to produce butyrate or break down different types of carbohydrates.
And the companies selling these tests often link your results to various health outcomes, right?
Oh, absolutely. They often draw connections between certain microbiome patterns and things like digestive issues, bloating, gas, IBS symptoms, but also weight, metabolism, immune function, mental well-being via the gut-brain axis, and even other chronic conditions.
For someone over 55 struggling with ongoing issues, I can see how that would be incredibly appealing. Finally getting an answer.
It's very tempting. But just like the DNA tests, the sources we looked at raise some really significant limitations here.
Such as?
Probably the biggest one is that there's no single definition of a healthy microbiome. It's incredibly unique to each person.
How so?
It's shaped by so many things. Your genetics, your diet throughout your life, where you live, your stress levels, sleep, medications you take. That's a huge one your age. What's normal and healthy for you might look totally different from someone else. So interpreting results definitively is really, really tricky.
So just because my report says I have less of Bacterium X than the average doesn't automatically mean it's bad for me.
Exactly. It's your personal ecosystem. And another huge point is correlation versus causation. Studies might show an association between, say, low levels of a certain bacteria and a health condition. But does the low level cause the condition? Or is it a result of the condition, or maybe the diet someone eats because of the condition or the medications they take?
Ah, the chicken or the egg problem.
Precisely. Current tests usually can't tell you which is which. It's often a complex two-way street.
And are the testing methods consistent between companies?
That's another challenge. There's a lack of standardization in how samples are collected, stored, processed, analyzed. Different labs might use different techniques or databases, so you could potentially get different results or interpretations from the same sample sent to two different companies. That raises questions about reliability.
What about the actual advice you get based on the results? Is it super specific?
Often, not really. While they might suggest specific foods sometimes, a lot of the actionable advice boils down to general good gut health practices. Eat more fiber from diverse plants, try fermented foods, cut back on processed stuff, and sugar.
Which is good advice, but...
But you don't necessarily need a $300 test to tell you that. Highly specific, targeted interventions based solely on these commercial microbiome tests are still mostly in the research phase, not clinically proven for widespread use.
And there's the issue of regulation, too.
Yes. Many of these direct-to-consumer tests fall into a sort of wellness category, which often means less rigorous regulatory oversight compared to clinical diagnostic tests. The claims made aren't always validated by large independent studies.
The sources mention a consensus statement in The Lancet, a major medical journal. What was the gist of that?
It's pretty clear. A group of international experts concluded there's insufficient evidence to recommend the routine clinical use of microbiome tests for diagnosing or managing most conditions right now.
Wow.
Yeah. They stressed that if these tests are used, it should ideally be by a qualified healthcare provider. Patients need to understand the limitations. And importantly, the testing company itself shouldn't be giving out therapeutic advice that has to come from your doctor or dietitian.
So the overall takeaway seems similar to the DNA tests. Fascinating area of research, huge potential for the future, but the current commercial tests are maybe more experimental than clinically proven tools for routine guidance.
That's a fair summary of the scientific consensus presented in the sources. For most people, especially in the 55-plus group, focusing on those well-established diet and lifestyle foundations is likely more effective, definitely more accessible, and certainly more cost-efficient right now.
Okay, that leads perfectly into evaluating the scientific evidence more broadly. When you look at major health organizations in the U.S., like the NIH, Harvard, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, what's their overall stance on using these tests for common health issues affecting older adults?
The message is really consistent. It's basically cautious optimism for the future, but a pretty strong recommendation against routine use today for most people and most conditions.
So the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the professional body for dietitians, they call Nutrigenomics emerging science for complex diseases.
Yes, that's their official position. They really emphasize that things like heart disease, diabetes, obesity are multifactorial. It's not just one gene or even a few, it's genes interacting with your environment, your lifestyle, your overall health. So relying on just a couple of gene variants to dictate your diet for these conditions isn't supported by solid evidence yet.
And we don't have strong proof from clinical trials that following the DNA test advice leads to better results than just following general healthy eating guidelines.
For the most part, no. The sources point to studies like the Food for Me study. It found that getting personalized nutrition advice based on things like your current diet, activity, maybe blood markers, did lead to better results than generic advice. But crucially, adding genetic information on top of that didn't seem to provide a significant extra benefit for outcomes like weight loss in that particular study.
Interesting. So personalization helps, but maybe the genetic part isn't the most critical piece for everyone right now.
That's what some of the evidence suggests. And there are big challenges in doing this research, right? It's so hard to isolate the effect of one gene or one nutrient when diet and lifestyle are so complex and intertwined. Many studies are small or short-term.
Makes sense. And for the microbiome testing, that Lancet consensus you mentioned is a key piece of evidence against routine use.
It really is. It highlights those core issues. No gold standard for healthy, the correlation versus causation problem, the lack of standardized methods between labs, and the often limited general nature of the advice provided. These are significant scientific hurdles for using these tests clinically right now.
And the fact that the NIH is actively funding research suggests it's still very much in the discovery phase.
Exactly. They're trying to move the field from just describing the microbiome to understanding the mechanisms and finding truly validated clinical applications. The fact that major research bodies are still in this phase tells you it's not quite ready for prime time in your doctor's office for most common issues.
So let's bring it back to a listener who's over 55. What's the practical implication of all this evidence? If you're considering these tests, what should you keep in mind?
I think the main takeaway is that the most powerful, scientifically proven, and cost-effective things you can do for your health, including your gut health, are still the foundational strategies.
Like what?
Consistently following evidence-based dietary patterns, think something like the USDA's MyPlate, specifically adapted for older adults. Getting regular physical activity, managing stress, prioritizing good sleep. These have decades of strong science behind them.
So while the test might offer, intriguing biological insights,
They're mostly still research tools at this point. They might give you interesting data points about yourself, but they rarely provide a magic bullet or a shortcut that outperforms just sticking consistently to those fundamental healthy habits.
and the sources really stressed consulting professionals.
Absolutely critical. Your doctor, a registered dietitian nutritionist, RDN, these professionals can look at the whole picture. Your medical history, your lifestyle, your medications, your personal goals and preferences. If you do get a test, they can help you interpret the results responsibly within that broader context, rather than just relying on the report from the company, which might not have that full picture. And be wary of companies giving specific medical or therapeutic advice directly.
Okay, let's get even more practical. We know why personalized approaches are appealing for the 55-plus crowd: metabolism changes, absorption issues, managing conditions.
Right, the appeal is strong. But let's talk practical realities of the current direct-to-consumer tests. First off, cost.
The sources mentioned anywhere from, $99 to $600 or even more?
Yeah, it could be a significant chunk of change. And a really key point. These tests are generally not covered by Medicare or standard health insurance.
Why not?
Because they're typically considered wellness or experimental, not medically necessary diagnostics for most conditions. So it's usually an out-of-pocket expense. That's a big consideration, especially if you're on a fixed income.
And accessibility, not just cost, but maybe navigating the websites, understanding the reports.
That can be a barrier too. And as we've discussed, the actual actionable advice you get often boils down to things you can find from reliable free sources or get from an RDN consultation, potentially for less than the cost of the test itself.
Like eat more fiber.
Exactly. Eat more fiber, try fermented foods, cut back on processed sugar. All excellent advice,
Yeah.
but not necessarily novel information unlocked only by the test.
So let's contrast that cost and uncertainty with something established, like the USDA MyPlate for older adults you mentioned.
Great comparison. MyPlate is free, it's readily available online or through health providers, and it's based on decades of solid scientific evidence. It guides you towards balanced meals, plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, healthy fats, hydration. It even encourages things like yogurt.
And it's adaptable.
Totally adaptable to your needs, budget, and preferences. It addresses the core nutritional principles for healthy aging and gut function in a proven, accessible way.
So given all this, are there any situations where the sources suggest testing might be considered for someone over 55?
Only in very specific, quite limited circumstances, and crucially, always with the guidance of a qualified healthcare professional.
Like what?
Maybe if there's suspicion of a rare genetic disorder with a very clear, established link to diet, though often these are found much earlier in life. Possibly if you're participating in a clinical research study involving these tests. Or maybe as a sort of last resort for really complex, puzzling symptoms where your medical team feels it might offer a new perspective. But that's still pretty uncommon in standard practice right now.
So for the vast majority of people over 55 looking to improve their health or manage common issues,
The most practical, impactful, and reliable approach supported by the sources is to focus your time, energy, and resources on consistently applying those evidence-based basics. Healthy eating, staying active, managing stress, sleeping well, and working closely with your doctor, and perhaps an RDN.
that seems to be the clear message. Let's make it even more concrete with those case studies from the sources. Tell us about Martha and her bloating issue.
Okay, so Martha, 68, was really troubled by persistent bloating. She decided to try a microbiome test, spend about $350. The report came back showing low microbial diversity and offered general advice. Increase fiber, eat fermented foods, reduce sugar, maybe try a probiotic.
And did it help?
She did notice some slight improvement. But her big realization was that the advice wasn't really specific to her results. It was standard good gut health advice she probably could have found elsewhere for less money. The main benefit of the test for her was actually motivating her to finally stick with the healthy habits she kind of already knew she should be doing.
Okay, so it acted as a catalyst, but an expensive one. What about John, who was struggling with his weight?
John, 62, wanted to lose weight and hoped a DNA test, $200, could tell him the perfect macro ratio carbs, protein, fat for his genes. His report, likely based on genes like FTO, suggested a lower carb, higher protein approach might be optimal for him.
Did it work?
He lost some weight initially, but he found that specific ratio really hard to maintain long term. He ultimately learned that things like his personal food preferences, his lifestyle, and just consistently managing his overall calorie intake were much more important for sustainable weight loss than trying to rigidly follow a genetically prescribed macro split.
So adherence and sustainability trumped the genetic prescription.
In his case, yes. He later worked with an RDN to create a more balanced plan that actually fit his life. The test provided interesting data, but it didn't override the fundamentals of energy balance and finding an approach he could stick with.
These examples really highlight that point, don't they? The tests might offer data, but consistent effort on the basics, often with professional support, seems to yield more lasting results.
That's the pattern the sources suggest. True personalization often comes from applying those broad, proven principles within the unique context of your life, not just from a lab report.
Let's touch on what some of the experts cited in the sources say. What's the overall feeling from them about routine use of these tests?
The consensus among the experts mentioned is pretty strong and aligns with what we've been discussing. For instance, Dr. Will Bulcevich, a gastroenterologist focused on gut health.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
He's a big advocate for plant-based diets, fiber, fermented foods as the primary tools for gut health, especially as we age. He generally discourages relying on expensive, unproven tests when these powerful lifestyle factors are available.
And the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, their official stance reflects this caution.
Definitely. They clearly state that using nutrigenomics for complex chronic diseases is still emerging science, not standard practice. They highlight the multifactorial nature of these conditions and stress that even interpreting these tests requires specialized training for RDNs.
Harvard's Public Health School echoes that.
Yes, their position is similar. They view the field as being in its early stages for the general public, emphasizing the need for more high-quality clinical trials. And they reiterate that any personalized advice should still fundamentally align with established general nutrition principles.
The sources also raised ethical points, particularly around privacy.
That's a crucial aspect. Dr. Kiran O'Doherty, who studies the social and ethical side, points out concerns about who owns and controls this sensitive biological data, like your microbiome profile.
And GINA, the genetic protection law, doesn't cover everything.
Right. GNA offers protection against discrimination in health insurance and employment based on genetic information. But, and this is a key distinction, it does not protect you when it comes to life insurance, disability insurance, or long-term care insurance. That's a really important consideration for anyone thinking about sharing this kind of data.
So pulling it all together, the experts and the evidence reviewed in the sources seem to view these direct-to-consumer tests more as research tools right now, not definitive diagnostics for routine use, especially for managing complex health goals in the 55-plus population.
Exactly. The most powerful validated strategies remain consistent healthy habits, lifestyle adjustments, and working with qualified healthcare professionals.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. It feels like we've really covered the journey, the history, how DNA and microbiome tests work, their promises, a critical look at the current scientific evidence, the practical stuff like cost and accessibility versus proven guidelines like MyPlate, and lessons from examples and experts.
And the core message that consistently emerged from the sources is this. For most Americans over 55, the most reliable, accessible, and cost-effective way to boost gut health and overall well-being is through consistent dedication to those fundamental, evidence-based strategies.
Healthy eating patterns, regular movement, stress management, good sleep.
And crucially, partnering with your healthcare team, your doctor, a registered dietitian nutritionist, for guidance tailored to you based on your whole health picture, not just a single test result.
It's not about dismissing the potential of personalized nutrition in the future that's still really exciting. It's about empowering you, the listener, with the knowledge of what's most effective and scientifically validated right now.
Right. Your health journey is personal, but the building blocks for vitality are largely universal and accessible.
Be that savvy consumer. Question big claims, understand privacy implications, and prioritize real food, consistent habits, and trusted professional advice.
So what are some concrete, actionable steps someone listening could take away from this?
First, prioritize that foundational nutrition. Focus on variety, especially plants. Aim for those 5-9 servings of fruits and veggies. Choose whole grains. Get lean protein, healthy fats. Stay hydrated.
And maybe consciously include some fermented foods if you like them and tolerate them well. Yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, and of course limit the highly processed foods, added sugars, excessive red meat.
Then don't forget the lifestyle pillars. Find ways to move your body regularly that you actually enjoy. Work on managing stress, huge for the gut-brain connection, and make quality sleep a real priority.
And perhaps most importantly, consult professionals. Start with your primary care doctor for any health concerns, and seriously consider working with a registered dietitian nutritionist, RDN.
Why an RDN specifically?
Because they're the credentialed nutrition experts trained to provide truly personalized counseling. They look at your medical history, your needs, your budget, your lifestyle, everything. They can help you navigate health issues and, if you do have test results, help you understand them responsibly within your bigger health picture, assuming they have the right specialized training.
Good advice. Remember, most DTC tests aren't diagnostic tools and aren't covered by insurance. Your best bet for long-term health is investing in those consistent habits and professional guidance.
And if you're looking for reliable information, the sources pointed to some great, trusted U.S. resources.
The USDA's MyPlate, especially their resources for older adults, that's at myplate.gov.
The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics website, eatright.org, has tons of info and a tool to find an RDN near you.
The National Institutes of Health, NIH. Check out the National Institute on Aging, nia.nih.gov, and look up the NIH Common Fund's Nutrition for Precision Health Initiative to see where the research is going.
Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health has an excellent nutrition source website.
And if you're just curious about microbiome research, the American Gut Project, americangut.org, is interesting to explore.
All free, evidence-based places to learn more.
Okay, before we finish, let's quickly tackle those FAQs based on the sources.
Right.
First one, insurance coverage for these tests. Medicare or private?
Generally, NIO, usually out of pocket, considered wellness or exploratory.
Can test results be used against me, like by insurers or employers?
GNA protects you regarding health insurance and employment discrimination based on genetics. However, it does not cover life insurance, disability, or long-term care insurance. That's a key gap.
Can a gut test diagnose IBS or IBD?
Definitely an O. Diagnosis comes from a doctor using symptoms, exams, medical tests like colonoscopies. Gut tests show associations, not diagnoses.
Do you need a doctor's prescription?
For most direct-to-consumer tests, no. But as we've said, experts strongly recommend discussing any results with your doctor or an RDN for responsible interpretation.
Rue, that was indeed a deep dive into personalized gut health testing. Hopefully you feel better equipped now to navigate this complex area, especially if you're over 55.
It's a fascinating field, no doubt, but knowing the current reality versus the future potential is so important for making smart health choices.
Next time on the deep dive, we're sticking with the theme of thriving as we age, but shifting focus slightly.
That's right. We'll be exploring the power of movement beyond the gym, how daily activity transforms your health after 55.
We're going to look at simple, practical ways to weave more activity into your day, the amazing benefits for bones, brain health, and more, and why you really don't need expensive gear or memberships to make a massive difference.
Sounds great. Get ready to move with us next time. But for today, what a journey through personalized testing. Understanding the limits alongside the potential is key.
Absolutely. Remember, your health path is unique, but informed steps based on solid science and professional guidance are always the best way forward.
And always talk to your own trusted healthcare providers for advice tailored specifically to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for being part of our community.
If you found this useful, maybe share it with a friend or family member who might benefit.
And we really would love to hear from you. Have you tried incorporating more fermented foods? Maybe you make your own yogurt or sauerkraut. Let us know your experiences in the comments section.
Until next time, take care, stay curious, and here's to embracing those vibrant, healthy years ahead.